Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, and in this video I'm going to be doing something a little bit more modern, which, just to give my channel some variety so it's not all retro stuff, which I enjoy retro stuff, I enjoy modern stuff. But anyway, while I'm waiting for Ubuntu to install on my capture PC that I built for the gaming room down here, I was looking for a cooler and some brackets and stuff, and I actually stumbled across two computers I had in my garage. This Optiplex 9010 and an Optiplex 790. The 790 was already mostly torn apart. I just stole the bracket off the motherboard, but that's not important. The scope of this video is actually something that is a topic that's been, I kind of noticed, and obviously a lot of other people in the community, modern community, has noticed, and that is the topic of the video. So I actually picked this up, like most people do, because I kind of wanted it for a gaming PC. This was what I was going to use for a gaming PC, and then I kind of set it aside because I took the parts out of it to build mine, and I was going to put some parts in this back in here to build a editing PC, which I never did, and then I was going to use it for a capture PC for down here in the basement, but I decided not to go the OEM route. So the topic of the video is, are quad cores basically dead, or going to be dead? It should be a better way to put it. And this is because of a trend of two events that's happened in the past few years, and a trend I feel is going to start happening, which is a very similar and mirrored effect that happened, I'd say about a little over a decade ago. So to kind of expand on what I'm talking about, we're going to make even years here, so that way it's easier on math. In 1980, if you wanted a computer, you either had to build one from parts, or you had to buy the Commodore PET, TRS-80, or the Apple II product. IBM had not yet been on the market, but for the most part, there was like inconsistency with architectures, there was inconsistency with drive support, and this kind of stuff, and BASIC, and assembly language, etc. Basically, in 1980, computer market was way different than it is, now. In 1990, just a mere 10 years, we went from the average CPU being 6502 or Z80 based, or also 8088 based, to roughly the 286 was the predominant CPU. I think the 386 was either just out or was about to come out. Double digit megahertz, kilobytes to a megabyte of RAM, EGA and then VGA graphics were prevalent, and hard drives were just double digit, maybe, in space. A mere 10 years in the year 2000, we were either breaching the 1 gigahertz mark or just about to breach the 1 gigahertz mark. We were hitting RAM amounts of, the average PC had, 64. Most enthusiasts built were 128, 256, even 512 megabytes, depending on your budget. Video cards were things like TNT2 Ultras and GeForce 256 and the Radeon series that had just come out, and Voodoo was still really prevalent, and hard drives were in the gigabytes now. Just 10 years after that, 2010, quad cores were the, enthusiast level PC. Budget PCs were dual core, maybe even some single cores, because Celerons and Pentiums were still out that were single cores, and video cards were now in the gigabytes. RAM was now in the gigabytes. So and now 2020, the average PC is now 6-core with Ryzen or the Intel offerings. Double-digit gigabytes of RAM, and now video cards that have ray tracing and can make games look awesome. So the speed in which computers have evolved is actually very impressively quick. And I guess the moment I'm talking about is mid-2000s, I think it was like 2006, when the quad cores had come out, the Core 2 Quad. And this was also the time in which Intel released the Core 2 series and took the crown back from AMD being the best budget CPU. In fact, I think it was also the best performance CPU, if I remember correctly. But anyway, but quad cores were enthusiast level. It was for the guys who had a lot of money. I mean, for example, the Core 2 Extreme, I think it was like 6850, was a $1,000 CPU when it launched. That's more than a lot of people had in their entire PCs, even now in their entire PCs. So quad cores were the enthusiast level hardware, and most software programmers knew that the average PC was still going to be either high clocked single cores or average clocked, somewhere around 2 to 3 gigahertz dual cores. There was the Intel Core 2 series or the AMD Athlon and Phenoms. So for the most part, quad cores have basically retained being the average PC, and as time has gone on from the inception of the quad core, which I believe was 2006, I don't know the exact year, but 2006, roughly around there, 2006, 2007, the quad core came out, and over time it's overshadowed the dual core as the average PC. The average PC you could buy even a couple of years ago was quad core, unless you specifically were looking for an extremely cheap PC and came across prior to a certain point anyway, an i3 or a Pentium specifically that had a dual core, whether it was hyper-threaded or not, and its AMD equivalent, which was dual core and hyper-threaded. For the most part, the average PC was quad core. And as time's gone on, again, most software developers realize that the average PC is now quad core. The average gaming PC was quad core. Yes, you have the enthusiasts that have hex core and above, but the average PC was quad core. And even up to last year, if you needed a budget gaming PC, a lot of people recommended either building one out of very old hardware or picking up one of these, specifically the 9010, off lease or off a business that was selling them cheap or giving them away in this case, because add an SSD, max out the RAM to 16 gigabyte, and if you were lucky, you got the i7-3770 or a higher rated i5 if it was just one generation back and had the second generation Core i series. You'd have a very compelling gaming PC as long as you kept your expectations in check. Throw a 650, 750 in here, the SSD, a RAM upgrade, maybe blow the dust out of it, maybe a little bit better cooler. You'd have maybe $100 or so, $100, $200 in one of these, and you'd have a decent gaming PC. Keep your expectations low, obviously. Keep it at 720 or 1080, and if you got 60 FPS, great. Because, if you were cheaping out on a computer, you're probably going to have a budget monitor that maxed out at about, roughly 60 hertz or 60 FPS. And yes, hertz and FPS is not directly, compatible, but I'm just going to say FPS for the most part for right now. And even up until last year, it was actually pretty easy to recommend one of these, because depends on the one you got, you could get a pretty decent PC, especially for a starter PC, especially if you were wanting to get into PC gaming because you've been on consoles for so long and you've heard the hype of the esports like Fortnite and Rocket League and Call of Duties. They would run on these machines fairly decently. And yeah, had I made a video like this about a year or even when I first started, I could still recommend a 9010. Because if you look at the Steam library, like the Steam game library, like the entirety of it, and you average all the game requirements, there might be one or two outliers, but for the most part, and with the exception of the old games that are being re-released on Steam that, will run on a potato, the average CPU is going to be a second to fourth gen Intel Core series or its AMD Phenom counterpart, which were quad cores. I think the actually average one is i7-3770. Some call for the second gen, some call for fourth gen. In fact, I haven't seen too many games that's called for the 5th, 6th, 7th gen, just because there's really not a performance difference that's noticeable once you get to those. But yeah, the thing is that the Steam library indicates that the average PC, as long as you have an i7-3770, 16 gig of RAM, and a decent SSD, and I think a GTX 960 or 970, you could play most of the Steam library. Obviously, there's some outliers, like I said, but that's the average. So this PC would play most of the Steam library, plus very popular esports titles. But two events happened that kind of makes just the idea of building a quad core out of old, outdated hardware like 3rd, 4th, 5th, etc. gen, Intel's and their AMD counterparts, makes it not worth building anymore, is The first event was AMD releasing its Ryzen and Intel's response to that, which was the 8th gen Core i series. When Ryzen was released, it basically proved that AMD got off their butts and produced a compelling competition to Intel's Core i series. Prior to this, from 1st gen to 7th gen, yes, there was increases of performance and efficiency, but for the most part, if you had an i7 20, I think it was 2600 was the i7 of 2nd gen, the 3700, the 4700, the 57, there was like maybe 2, 3, 4% increases from generation to generation. Intel was just skating along. AMD released the Ryzen and basically announced it, and Intel was worried because their budget, Ryzen 3, was quad core. Their Ryzen 5, their average PC CPU was going to be hex core. So Intel needed to do something, so 8th gen, they completely restructured everything. i3s became quad cores, i5s became hex cores. And it wasn't that moment that stopped the quad core, because the budget builds at the time was the Ryzen 3 1200 and the i3 8100. Those were budget CPUs for budget builds with appropriate boards. You could still have a budget quad core. And for the enthusiast side, you hit the Ryzen 5 and the i5, which were now hex cores. And then you had the Ryzen 7s and the i7s, which were, I believe, hyper-threaded. So you had 6-core, 12-thread. I believe the i7 was 8-core. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, yeah, that was the first event. And it kind of started pushing the 7th and older gens away from being budget builds. It kind of made them not worth it, because why buy one of these off lease for, at the time, I think $150, $100, when just a couple $100 more you could get a decent budget board, decent budget CPU, and a budget GPU, and have a computer that you actually had a decent upgrade path for, because most of these were maxed out. Once you max out one of these CPUs, or these towers, you're basically done with it. You can't do much. So that started this trend of the average PC starting to become hex cores. And yes, I upgraded to hex core with my Ryzen 5. So the average CPU, and after 2018, was hex core. Yes, there were still quad cores. Yes, they were still budget builds, but the average PC user was now shifting to, the i3 or the Ryzen 3 is this much, just a couple more bucks, and I get the Ryzen 5, I get hex core. And so is it even worth building a quad core at the time? And then the second event happened. And it's actually a very subtle event. A game came out that kind of shook up the minimum requirements for PC games. Because for the longest time, it was quad core. It just depended on the generation and the speed and its instruction sets. A little game called Elden Ring. Now, I have not played Elden Ring yet. It looks gorgeous. I've watched YouTubers play it. But I decided to check out the minimum requirements. It calls for an 8th gen i5, specifically I believe the 8400, which is a hex core processor. Yeah, its minimum requirements was a mid-tier PC in 2018. Prior to this, the high tier or high-end computer from just 3rd or 4th gen, you'd skate by with it for a few years. But this game was calling for 6-core at minimum. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, it's a huge open world game, and obviously there's a lot of underlying systems. The more cores you have, and also the more threads, the more the load can be spread out across those cores. So you don't have any throttling or any hardware lockups. And yes, I know there's technically somebody did get it to run on an i3 8100, but that's besides the point. The point is that game has pretty beefy requirements. It basically shoved everything prior to 8th gen out the door, because this isn't going to run Elden Ring. This isn't going to run it at all. So I'm not trying to say the quad cores are immediately dead. What I'm trying to say is I'm not surprised that it requires 6 cores. In fact, I'm also not surprised that more games are going to start requiring it. At least 6 hex cores. Because it's a huge open world game, and because of the underlying systems it has, it gives the game developers more breathing room. Just like the quad cores when they came out and it was becoming the average, these software developers now have all this extra room with extra cores to really start stretching their game and pushing games in terms of, map size, enemies, number of enemies, the size of enemies, the breadth of the game can really expand with more cores. And Elden Ring needed the 6 cores to really show its beauty. Or at least the taste of it anyway. You actually do need more than 6 cores to get the full experience, but again, not the point. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the future, games like Fallout 5, Elder Scrolls 6, GTA 6, I wouldn't be surprised if some of those start calling for hex cores. Because now they have all this extra room. Because the average PC now is going to be hex core. By now, a lot of people who are into PC gaming have upgraded from these budget, off-lease, 3rd gen, 4th gen i7s to, at minimum, 8th gen. And those boards do support, some of them do anyway, the 6-core i5s. So it's to the point where we're going to start seeing a subtle shift. Now, it's not going to be instantaneous. It's going to be just like when the quad cores came out. It's going to be a gradual step until eventually most AAA title releases are going to call for hex cores, which is both a good thing. It really is. It's a good thing because it means that we can see larger games. Because if you ever play old retro games, it's almost like you're seeing a glimpse of what the developers and the programmers and the coders wanted you to see. They had these grand ideas for games, but they knew they were limited by the hardware. Now we're not limited by hardware really anymore. We're limited by, well, I guess the patience of gamers when they announce a game and it takes forever to come out. But hardware-wise, they're not restricted anymore. I mean, again, the average PC is now going to be hex core pretty soon, if not already. So, like I said, I can't say that, it's not a good thing. Because it is. Because now we're going to start seeing these huge games. Look at games like Dark Souls. Look at games like Skyrim. Skyrim's an old game, and it is an open world game, and yes, it has some bugs and faults. Fallout 4, huge game. Graphically, these games are getting more and more impressive. I mean, there's, even GTA 6. The leaked screenshots that were out there, and the gentleman that released it did get arrested, if I read correctly. Looks gorgeous. The idea of the game is gorgeous, is amazing. Games are becoming so realistic and so, real looking that it's, you need all that hardware. Even VR. Even though VR right now it is hardware demanding, but it's not super demanding right now. But as the graphic quality improves on VR and VR coders and stuff start seeing that the average PC is going to be getting beefed up and more beefier, it could make VR look more and more realistic. To the point where, well, we've all watched Ready Player One. We know where that's going to go. However, this is also a bad thing that it is happening. Just like before when the quad cores were coming out and became more and more mainstream, dual cores were being pushed to the side. How many towers did I see at the scrapyard that had Core 2 Duo stickers? Or Pentium 4 stickers that were single core? That they can't run Windows 10. They can't run a modern operating system. Or they probably could with some workarounds, but they are not going to be able to play even esports titles. Like, sure, a Core 2 Duo could run, Windows 10, but is it going to run Rocket League well? Is it going to run Fortnite well? So the thing is, the swan song for these older hardwares, the quad cores, is coming. The clearing the throat, getting ready to sing the swan song of quad cores. And it is kind of sad because it's going to contribute to so much e-waste. It really is. Now, hopefully, by that point, most of the quad cores are going to be long past their life of being able to run Windows, I think 11. 11 is probably going to be the standard in here in a few years. But it's not going to be an instantaneous thing. It's going to be very gradual, but it is going to happen. So, am I saying to dump your, if you're running these still, to dump them? No, because they're still useful. Like I said, I was going to use this for a capture PC or an editing PC for my channel. Would it have the horsepower to do it? fully to my, that I want to improve and make better videos? Probably not. But you can still, for a starter PC or maybe the grandma PC to get an upgrade off that aging Pentium 4, sure. She's not going to need more than quad cores. The average Office PC is not going to need more than quad cores. But as the PC gamer market increases and goes into hex cores, that's going to start dripping into the mainstream computers being hex core as well. So, yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not going to be an instantaneous thing. Are going to be completely obsoleted to where they wouldn't even be recommended for a budget PC, even for esports. So, yes, it's coming. Is it avoidable? No. Because game developers are going to start realizing they have more room to work with hex cores and octa cores, and I think that I've even seen 10 core and 12 core CPUs, which is just outstanding to me. So yeah, with that being said, thank you for listening to me ramble about this topic. The only reason why I even thought about it was because I kind of saw both of these in my garage when I was pulling the cooler off for the capture PC, and I saw this one sitting right next to the 790 I tore apart for the cooler bracket. And it kind of got me thinking. This was going to be my original gaming PC because it was a quad core and it could handle Steam. But at the same time, the time of these quad core off lease machines being the ideal budget, 720 1080p gaming machine is coming to an end. And is there going to be a replacement for these? Probably not, because of a couple other things that's been going on with OEM machines that will make them basically impossible to upgrade, which is also adding to e-waste. That's a topic for another video. So yeah, anyway, thanks everyone for watching this video of the rambling thoughts of hex cores and quad cores. Yeah, I didn't do too much research on the dates like when quad cores came out or when the i8 or the 8th gen Core i series came out. This was more just kind of an off the cuff, unscripted kind of thing. The only thing I really did do was I Googled, the average Steam requirements and just went from there. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching this video. If you have any comments or any thoughts of it, or even anything about this topic, put it down in the comments, because I do want to do a follow-up on this at some point. Whether it's in a year or a few months or even a few years. I do want to broach this topic again. So put it down in the comments any of your thoughts or concerns or even questions, and I will get to them at some point. To do a follow-up video. If you want to see me restore this thing to at least some sort of functional state, because right now there's no CPU, no RAM, no hard drive, no really anything. Because I think it'd be a neat computer to at least get back together and put Linux on it or something, and maybe do some benchmarks and just see what this thing could do. But yeah, if you like the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel to help the channel grow, because every subscriber does help the channel get bigger, so that I can make bigger and better quality videos. Hit the notification bell to be notified when I upload more content. And yeah, let me know your thoughts, because I want to hear them. And that being said, thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.